Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host Todd Tavares. This podcast moves beyond questions of God's existence to ask, what's next in a godless world? If you're enjoying the show so far, remember to like and subscribe, rate and review, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Beyond Atheism is produced and distributed by Atheist United Studios.
Let's get deep and dark today on Beyond Atheism. Today, we plumb the depths and limits to our own mortality. If, as atheists, materialists, or positivists, we reject the commonly accepted notions of an afterlife, that leaves us with an eternity-sized hole in our description of the world. Should we attempt to fill this vast void, or are there other explanations and conceptions that better address the finitude of life and consciousness? Joining us today to discuss what happens after death is Tom Clark. Tom is a senior research associate at the Heller School of Social Policy and Management and the creator of naturalism.org, among the web's most comprehensive resources on worldview naturalism and its implications and applications. He's the author of Encountering Naturalism, a Worldview and Its Uses, and writes on naturalism, free will, consciousness, addiction, and related philosophical and social concerns. Tom, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Gentlemen, good to be here. By the way, in the introduction, there was one word left out in my bio, which is Brandeis University. That's where the Heller School of Social Policy and Management is. So Brandeis University is in Waltham, Massachusetts, and just wanted to make sure that was imparted to our audience. Anyway, good to be here.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much, Tom, for coming on. Well, just to sort of get into it, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your background. How did you come to get involved in this field of naturalism?
Well, I studied with Dan Dennett at Tufts University for a little while, but before that I got interested in Eastern philosophy through Alan Watts, who you may have heard of, and he'll come up later on in our discussion about death. And so I put the two together and submitted a monograph to Dennett at Tufts, and I got admitted there for graduate study. Never did get my degree, but it was a interesting experience. So that philosophically led me to eventually to naturalism as a worldview. So naturalism.org is a website where all the explanation and implications of worldview naturalism are spelled out. But it's basically a science-based, empirical, non-supernatural, obviously, worldview that I think pretty much covers the waterfront if you're looking for a comprehensive worldview. So I think it's something that would be very attractive to atheists, and I think it goes beyond atheism in positing something that is comprehensive and positive. That if you're in the market for a worldview, it might serve your purposes. Not everyone is in the market for a worldview. So anyway, that's kind of a thumbnail of how I got there and where I'm at.
Well played use of Beyond Atheism as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
So before we start delving into what naturalism tells us about death and consciousness, what are some of the things we should reject? And what's the reasoning behind it? And I'm thinking like, okay, heaven and hell are out. Can we also reject reincarnation and things like eternal recurrence, where you come back and live the same life again and again and again? And why should we?
Yeah, and why exactly? Why should we reject these things? I think the basic premise, the starting point for naturalism, as I see it, is about one's epistemology. It's how you know what you know. What are the grounds for belief that you espouse? And the atheists, of course, reject the supernatural, most of the grounds that there's no evidence for it. And I think that's a valid position to take, and it's a rational position to take. So if we're denying the existence of the list that you had, spirits, souls, supernatural entities, the reason we do, I think, the rational reason we do is because there's no intersubjective, objective, publicly available evidence to support belief in such things. So I don't think this is particularly controversial if, as you guys are atheists. It's a rational way of, I think, an epistemologically rational way to approach how we know what we know. So that's to me, the most essential first step in getting to atheism, and then beyond that to a globally naturalistic view of ourselves. It's essentially to stick with empiricism, what science is best known for, and other basically evidence-based pursuits. What the universities are encourage, looking at evidence, looking at reason and logic. Nothing particularly controversial here, but I think it's an essential first step. And of course, what I'm saying here will rule out probably the majority of people on the planet, because they're not particularly committed to empiricism or intersubjective evidence. They're enthralled to faith, revealed texts, religious authority, intuition, one's own personal experience. You should never trust your personal experience. Never. Always look for confirmation outside it. That's one of the main lessons.
And that's what you mean by intersubjective?
Right, exactly right. And that
So
if you do that, you won't find evidence for all these things that atheists and other people, rational folks, would discount.
So, Tom, a lot of what you mean by that is things that other people count as evidence. If you look at Christian writings, things like books like Heaven is for Real, where it's a little kid who goes to heaven for 15 minutes. Like, that's just a subjective experience. That's not evidence by what we're talking about. So instead, what is the evidence that we do have? What's the evidence that we can rely on to make empirical claims?
Well, I think the paradigm example is of scientific inquiry, where you get a bunch of observers in a situation in which there's a public object or objects like a measuring instrument that is available to everyone. And although everyone has their own subjective experience, you're calibrating your own experience and validating it through this community of observers. And this is very commonsensical, because in everyday life, you don't trust a particular person's claim. Usually, if it's at all controversial, you would want to check it. For instance, the fact that, I don't know, that something is going on in my backyard. And did you see that there was a thief in my backyard? Well, I say, well, just a second. You saw it. Did anyone else see it? Why should I believe your claim? So the basic idea is you want intersubjectivity in terms of what people observe that's publicly available, your own personal experience, and even the personal experiences of thousands and millions of people, say, gathered in a stadium, being convinced by Jerry Falwell that they've experienced God, doesn't count, because there's no public object there to validate all those experiences.
That being spiritual.
Yeah. And the Christian apologists are all about personal experience as being a valid, secure basis for belief. But in a way, didn't Jesus say, someone wanted proof? Oh, yes, it was Doubting Thomas, I think. Mm-hmm. Doubting Thomas.
Right, yes.
He wanted something in the way of objective proof of, say, the life hereafter or the divinity of Christ. And Jesus basically put him down for that, saying, oh, ye of little faith. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to convince you guys of this, but I'm just stating what's obvious to us, I think.
Yeah. I think, maybe transitioning into the topic of death, there's the difficulty that, no one is around really for death. So I think that kind of makes it a challenge to, I don't know if the right thing to say is to know what happens after death, but, well, maybe you can say, or maybe you can say, what is sort of the way atheists make a mistake when they think about death?
Yeah. Well, of course, atheists, or many folks of a secular persuasion, they reject the idea of the afterlife. So what they come up with as the alternative is a kind of idea of blankness or emptiness or nothingness or oblivion, or the black void that they disappear into after death. And there's an article on the website, naturalism.org, called Death, Nothingness, and Subjectivity. Maybe you can put it in your links attached to this episode, in which I cite many, many examples of very smart people who have said this is what they're anticipating at death, a kind of oblivion, kind of nothingness. And I think it's a kind of a natural reaction to to suppose that, well, if I'm not continuing into something like an afterlife, then the alternative has to be what? Nothing, blankness. But what I claim in this article, it's not that hard to understand, is that the idea of nothingness into which you would disappear and more or less experience after death is incoherent. There's nothing, nothingness doesn't exist, so the person who dies can't go into it to experience not being there. So that's the mistake I see atheists and other secularists who may not identify as secular as atheists making. And again, this is not a straw man. This is, I document very carefully in the article, and it's a mistake that people constantly make, is to reify nothingness. In fact, the most recent example I've come across is by a very smart guy, Anil Seth, S-E-T-H. Anil Seth, he's a neuroscientist. He's written a book on consciousness called Being You. And in it, he talks about his experience of being anesthetized during an operation. And he said, it was like he wasn't there. And he said, well, it was it's something that he looks forward to at death, this sort of complete cessation.
Right.
Now, I've
Right.
written a review of his book, which is a great book, by the way. If we want to talk about consciousness, we'll definitely want to touch on what Seth says. It's great. Being You, don't miss it. But I do take him to task for this error. And it is an error. It's simply a misplaced reification of nothingness, and to suppose that we, as experiencing subjects, somehow fall into it at death, never to experience any. But it's an experience of no experience, which is incoherent, right?
Right.
So, and again, this is not particularly new insight. Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, said, as you may know, when death is, we are not. When we are, death is not. When death is, we are not. It kind of points in that direction. But what I've done in this article is to sort of make clear, by means of a thought experiment, just the incoherence of this idea, and to suggest something else which is more positive, which may or not be comforting, which is that we shouldn't anticipate nothingness at death.
Well, for that first part, I want to get to what we will experience or not experience. So, because in the first part, what you're saying is like we can't perceive nothing because it is a perception, right? There's no phenomenon that we are experiencing, or is it that there's no one to perceive it?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of experiencing not the lack of experience is a contradiction. Experiences, now put it another way, we're always present to ourselves as conscious agents, as conscious beings. Consciousness is always present for itself. It never finds itself absent from the scene. This is something I bring up quite a bit in the article. So you've never found yourself absent. You have never not been there as far as you're concerned, even though obviously you have a limited lifespan. You didn't exist however many years ago, and you'll cease to exist at some point in the future. But for you as a conscious agent, there is no alternative but your experience.
Even in periods of disassociation, there's still that.
Well, I mean, if you go to, yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by disassociation, but if you take a nap or go to sleep or are unconscious for any length of time, none of that is part of your experience. There's an immediate transition from the first experience, I mean, the last experience before an unconscious episode, and the first experience when that episode ends, as Anil Seth was talking about. And I've had this experience too, going into surgery. You are anesthetized, and then immediately you wake up in the recovery room. There's been no interval. And that's the point. There's no interval.
Yeah. I mean, it would almost be hard to imagine what that would be like to be experiencing a lack of experience. I mean, you couldn't really be done.
It can't be done. That's the point. To try to imagine yourself in oblivion or blackness or nothingness, the eternal void, it's not going to happen. It's not a possible experience. It's not something you have to concern yourself with as death approaches.
Yeah. But yeah, but I guess where I think the argument gets really interesting is the death of of the individual isn't maybe like the death of experience per se, I guess. Is I don't know if that's if you agree with that way of putting it, but maybe you can then like move on to the next part, like what what does happen after death, I guess,
Yeah.
or
What
what
should
should
we
we
expect?
expect? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say, well, what should we anticipate? Imagine you're going to be dying in the next minute or so. What should you anticipate? Obviously, well, many people will be terrified. I'm sure I will be somewhat terrified. But what I do in the paper, and I really would encourage people to read the paper, because to actually grasp this, it's extremely helpful to go through this thought experiment, and which is, I'll just outline it quickly, which is if you go to sleep for however long or are put under and by with anesthesia. Imagine you wake up and you've been changed a little bit, and so you're still the same person when you wake up, and there's been no emptiness or interval which you experience between the two episodes. You wake up instantaneously as a slightly different person, but you're still basically who you are. And then, but there's been no interval of blackness or nothingness. There's been just a stream of constant experience in which you survive as a particular person. That's personal subjective continuity. You survive. You continue as the same person. Continuous conscious experience throughout the unconscious interval. Now imagine that bit by bit in future episodes, you're changed more and more. So imagine you wake up and you're quite changed, but you're still the same person. Basically, people still identify you as, say, Nathan, and you identify yourself as Nathan. You have the same, more or less the same memories, but you're fairly significantly changed in your character and taste, but you're still identifiable as Nathan. But again, there's been no subjective discontinuity between when you were put under and woke up, and it could be however many years later, right? Okay. Now, the next step is imagine that the person who wakes up from this transformation is not Nathan anymore, because your character has been changed just enough to make you someone who doesn't identify themselves as Nathan, and no one else identifies you as Nathan. Now, when you wake up, has there been a blank or emptiness between your going asleep or being anesthetized as Nathan and waking up as not Nathan? No. You see what I mean? So there's an indeterminacy there, but that's the point. Up to the point at which you're no longer Nathan, there's been personal subjective continuity. In other words, you survive as a person throughout all these transformations, and there's been no discontinuity in your subjective experience. However, in the case where Nathan doesn't survive, there's still been continuity of experience. But Nathan is not there any longer. So there's the personal subjective continuity of being Nathan has been discontinued. But what is continuous? There's a continuous stream of subjectivity between Nathan and the person who Nathan has been transformed into. What is that? I call it generic subjective continuity. Generic in the fact that there's no particular person who has survived this transformation, but there's been no blank or emptiness or discontinuity between the subjective experiences of the person, Nathan, who was put to sleep, and the person, not Nathan, who wakes up however long later. And then if you accept this, and I think it works pretty well. I don't think there's any reason to suppose that this continuity shouldn't be expected. If that's the case, then the final step is to say that death and birth are just like this transformation, except that there's no obvious successor to the person who dies. Okay, and the positive way to put this is you've always been present, and the person who wakes up, either from the transformation thought experiment or who is born normally, has never found themselves not present. And the same thing is true for you before your death. You've never found yourself not present. You're always present for yourself. So this generic subjective continuity, I think, is sort of a function of how consciousness is as a natural phenomenon. But again, the death and birth continuum of generic subjective continuity is very difficult to accept because of the fact that there's no obvious successor. Whereas in the transformation thought experiment, you can see that there was a successor to Nathan that gradually became not Nathan. And at some point, Nathan is dead. Nathan dies because of this transformation, and a new person is there. But that's what death and birth are. They're a transformation of the context of consciousness. And there is no interval of blackness or emptiness or void in between them that can be experienced by anybody. That's the key. So an atheist, if they carefully think about it, should reach this conclusion. This is my contention. Now, I may be wrong. I don't want to sound too dogmatic about this. And people will have, of course, I am dogmatic. I'm so convinced. How could I be wrong? But I think it's a persuasive argument. It's got a lot of traction. Sam Harris did a podcast about it, and pretty much definitely endorsed the conclusion. But I want to say that Alan Watts, who I mentioned in the introduction, basically reached this conclusion 30 years ago in a talk that I linked to at the website. He asked the question, what would it be like to go to sleep and never wake up? So that's a great way of putting it. I mean, it really, it's a startling question. What would it be like to go to sleep and never wake up? Well, that's what death is in a way. But as Watts points out, you do wake up. All these centers of consciousness find themselves present. So I don't want to suggest anything mystical or supernatural here. There's no personal subjective continuity. That's a really important point, is that people don't suppose that they, as a particular person, survive. Generic subjective continuity is exactly that. It's generic. It's not personal. So
some form of consciousness survives.
Right. It doesn't even have to be human. It doesn't have to be human. Yeah. It could be an AI that's achieved a consciousness, I don't know, in another galaxy or in another universe. So it's a kind of weird, frankly, it's a very weird, strange idea that consciousness is.
And I have a lot of questions about it, Tom.
Oh, sure, good.
I think I need to start with a recap quickly, because this sounds a lot like the ship of Theseus, where it's the boat where you're constantly replacing the broken pieces with new pieces. And then once you've replaced all the parts, is it the same boat? And this says
no.
The subjective, but it has a subjective experience.
Yeah, no, you're talking about the same boat. You're talking about, you see, that would be personal ship continuity.
Right. But what's added to this is the ship doesn't have consciousness, right? But we're thinking about that sort of problem, right? Is that you have these changes that just occur over time. And if we put it on a person, what we're thinking about, we can bring it down to a cellular level, right? Where we do, like at the molecular level, all the molecules are different. They cycle through. At the cellular level, I'm not the same collection of cells that I was 10 or 20 years ago. Those have all been replaced. But I feel like I exist as the same person.
You are
singular consciousness.
Yeah, you are the same person. The pattern has persisted. Right. The pattern has persisted throughout these changes.
Right. Without that. So and that's okay. So naturalism posits that this is true, right? Our bodies change over time, but this consciousness persists.
Yeah, and it persists in the context of you being a single person throughout the changes of your body. So you as a person persist as a particular pattern of personality, preferences, desires, habits, and physical characteristics. But that pattern at death is completely erased.
That's
right.
At death, it's only at death.
Yeah,
only at death.
Right. That personal continuity is erased. It ends at death. So what you just said, of course, is true, that you as a person survive all kinds of physical transformations in your body. That's of course true, but that's sort of the physical vehicle of your personal subjective continuity.
But now, okay, and that's the next thing I was wondering about, is what this says about dualism in terms of like the mind-body distinction. Because I I'm pretty sure like modern sort of philosophy says, okay, there's not really that dualism. It is mind is a function of the body. It's a function of how the organs work together, how the brain works. There is this material explanation for it. Is that still here when we think about how generic subjective continuity exists? It's still this continuation based on our material existence, which shapes it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, this is consistent with physicalism or materialism in terms of how we understand consciousness. Of course, understanding what consciousness is a hot topic. It's not been. We don't know yet exactly what it counts, but there's good reason to believe it supervenes on the physical brain, and when the brain goes, your particular consciousness ceases. Right. So that's the end of you as a person. But of course, other consciousnesses will exist and will come into being, and each of them has never found him or herself or itself absent. That's one way to look at it. Again, the only way I can probably convince people of this is through the thought experiment. But I mean, your points. I mean, I accept them. Consciousness is as far as we know, supervenient on a physical process. Whether consciousness itself is identical with a physical process, I think, is an open question. And I've written about consciousness, have published a few papers on it. I have my own theories about it, which challenge the idea that the consciousness might be sort of completely within the physicalist paradigm. But we don't necessarily have to get into that. But
I know.
but we could. I mean, we could.
It'd be a long night, Tom.
Yeah,
we've got a lot.
Yeah. But in terms of what you were saying about the physicalist basis of as far as we know, it's sort of the default assumption is that to be conscious, you have to be a certain physically instantiated system running certain kinds of processes. That's what we know for sure about consciousness right now. That's maybe the only thing we know for sure is that you have to have a brain to be conscious.
Right. So at some point with life, it is created, this consciousness. It's created and destroyed at the beginning and end of life.
Yeah, but life might not be a necessary condition for consciousness. We might be able to arrange it in an artificial system. So the generic subjective continuity that I'm suggesting might be the case would apply to any artificial consciousness that might be created as well.
I feel like there's also something about like the nature of the self or something that, maybe everyone experiences themselves as this, like the self. And I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure how to really articulate. I mean, I think, one way to think about it maybe is like, this is a similar thought experiment, I guess, like this idea of, going through a teleporter and like having yourself kind of like totally rearranged and then reassembled. But it's like, or even you could say like, your memory is sort of like taken in a USB stick and then like re-uploaded in a certain way. And then your memories are just re-inputted in, and you have the same memories of such and such a thing, but maybe it was even a different host body or something like that. Yeah. I don't know if there's any sort of coherence in that kind of rambling.
Well, no. I mean, what you're simply talking about personal subjective continuity across a transformation in the medium of what holds the characteristics, the patterns that you consist of. In other words, if you uploaded it to a USB drive or something like that in the far future, that would be Nathan. And presumably, if it were well done, it would be subjectively continuous with who you are now, in some sense. So I don't see any problem with that. That's not a metaphysical. That's to me not particularly metaphysically contentious, because if we are patterns or real patterns, as Dan Dennett would put it, then the patterns can be implemented in perhaps any substrate. I mean, there is some controversy about this. Do we need is life, for instance, to get back to what Todd said, is life necessary for consciousness? Anil Seth thinks it might be. I don't think so. Dave Chalmers and other philosophers are pretty much they're functionalists who believe that the substrate, whether it's biological or artificial, doesn't matter that much. As long as you replicate at a sufficient level of detail the patterns and processes, you're going to end up with the same, say, person. So that doesn't particularly affect the idea of generic subjective continuity. And what you're talking about, we're talking about, Nathan, was personal subjective continuity given a transformation of the substrate. So I don't think that that's problematic, or it shouldn't be too problematic. But it does depend on whether you suppose there's something about, say, biological life that's essential for consciousness. And there's debate about that. I don't think my opinion is no, but I could be wrong.
But there is what that brings into it, though, is the importance of memory. I think is one of the suggestions, because part of what happens is, I mean, with the example of like a Star Trek transporter, right? That converts a person into an energy pattern that, right? It annihilates the matter. You just have this energy pattern, and that's transported where the matter is recreated. And what that tells us is like what you're doing is you're eliminating a person and you reconstruct a perfect copy. And that perfect copy has the continuity.
Yep.
Right.
Right.
Because in part because they have the memory.
Yep. Yep.
But right. But part of what Nathan is suggesting, when we think about this transfer to a different format, right? If you're just uploading your consciousness, let's say, or your self into the matrix, you can sort of have a forking branch, right? Where your physical self continues on, but that new form, because it has the same memories, it has the same patterns, it has the same identity, it would also have consciousness, and it would have a continuity, correct?
Yeah, I mean,
I
Derek.
mean, that's what I see happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Derek Parfit, in his book Reasons and Persons, gets into these thought experiments, as have other philosophers, that you have a branching scenario. And so, who are you in this branching scenario? Well, Parfit talks about closest continuers. Each of the branches has as their closest continuer the person who existed before the branching. And so they both might lay claim to subjective continuity with that person, and they both be right. But as to who are you at that point? Well, there are two selves in existence, each of which has similar memories, but they will immediately start becoming different. They'll be different persons eventually, even though they branched from the same person.
Yeah. So at what point would memory start to be important for this? Because there is a point where you can just start forgetting your existence, right? So if we travel back in our mind to grade school and then start searching for our earliest memories, things get really, really hazy, and then at a certain point you just don't have memories, but we do have this sense that we have persisted since that time.
Yeah, well,
Is there a point where, like, okay, that before I was 5, before I was 3, that's a different person, or should we accept that there's a continuity there?
well, there's obviously a physical continuity that you had with that 4-year-old, shall we say, or 3-year-old.
Yeah, let's take the average. 4 is great. Yeah.
And that is sufficient for most of us to say that you were that person, even though you don't have the memory of being that person. I mean, that's physical continuity. That's an important aspect of personal continuity in most cases. So, I don't see that as being particularly problematic for personal subjective continuity. I mean, your memories, but it's an interesting point though that persons arise out of and sort of coagulate and solidify as memories get consolidated. So before age 3, you probably had a personality then, but you didn't have any self-conscious sense of being a person. You certainly didn't have any explicit reflective self-consciousness of being having existed. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any problem about identifying yourself with that infant, or it's just that you don't have memories of being that person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have issues with my self-consciousness anyway. I blame past Todd, the Todd that was in the past, for a lot of my problems. That guy had no idea what he was doing. But present Todd has got it pretty well figured out. And present Todd has it well enough figured out that future Todd is going to take care of everything.
Yeah.
Right. And good luck.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
So
it's the same every
it's,
day.
yeah.
Every day I wake up and realize it's still
It
true.
sounds like a lot like past Todd to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's what, yesterday I thought future Todd would figure it out, but he, I guess,
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
because yesterday was just as bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, such is life. We do what we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Ah,
I sort of feel I mean, like, I guess we've been talking mostly about kind of wrapping our head around different instances of like this personal subjective continuity. But I think with these different thought experiments, eventually you do realize, or I think so, that there isn't too much of a leap then to make the jump to the generic subjective continuity. That, if you imagine yourself as like, yeah, as a toddler or something, where it almost does seem like a different person, but nonetheless there is that continuity. And I guess, and then to think, there's, after I die, you might even think like at the very moment of my death there'll be some other consciousness that arises. There just won't be the memory, but the sort of the experience of consciousness persists. um I guess, yeah, I don't know if that
well, yeah. The
if
thing
that
is,
if that's right, or
we're always understandably searching for some kind of personal continuity, because that's what we're wired to want. We're designed by, we were selected to have for by evolution to have this very strong sense of wanting to persist. So in imagining the situation after death, we definitely tend to project ourselves as this person and continuing. That's not possible. That's not going to happen. If you're a naturalist like we are, it's just not going to happen. But on the other hand, we shouldn't make the mistake of projecting ourselves into nothingness as well. And I think the reminder is just to see that you've never not been present for yourself. And if you let that sink in, then you'll see that at death, the thing to anticipate is not nothing. It's the fact that you were always present, and consciousness can never be absent for itself. And so the conclusion I don't think it's a logical conclusion. It's kind of the intuition I'm trying to push, is that consciousness will always inevitably find itself present in all the forms that exist and come into being. And so therefore at death, what you as a particular person might anticipate is just being someone else entirely different, entirely other. And at the end of the article, I call it the radical refreshment of subjectivity. And the problem is, of course, there's no memory or knowledge transferred. You, except in the case of an artificial intelligence that comes into being with a full set of sort of pre-installed knowledge, that being would have in its repertoire already, say, the full complement of human knowledge as we now have it. So it wouldn't it wouldn't have to start from scratch, so to speak. It would find itself conscious with all of its knowledge there, ready to go. That's how it is for us human beings, as we were talked about growing up. We gradually get all this knowledge installed, and then it all gets destroyed at death. It's very annoying.
Yeah.
So, because yeah, it's frustrating because we come to all these enlightening conclusions and we want to sort of transmit them to other people, but it's not possible to make them cross the birth and death boundary except by culture. But what I'm suggesting is for an artificial intelligence that's imbued at its inception with, say, a lot of knowledge, including this knowledge that we're now discussing, that being would, in effect, have a kind of continuity, sort of a cognitive continuity going for it that mere biological creatures can't have because they have to grow up and be taught. So interesting speculation about the sort of the advantages of being an artificially conscious system.
Yeah. Do you find that when you conceptualize things that way, it has a sort of ethical implication for artificial intelligence? And or do you find that this has ethical implications that you've imparted into your life just from this worldview?
Well, the thing about the generic subjective continuity is that it subtracts one hope, and that hope is that you don't have to continue to have experience. The hope that many people want is to end up in oblivion. They don't want to be conscious. This is the Buddhist hope of not being reborn. Unfortunately, generic subjective continuity, this thesis is, I'm sorry, there is no respite from experience, which to me is actually rather, that's a drag, because as lovely and wonderful and ecstatic as experience can be, it's, especially as you get on in your years, you say, God, I would just like a rest. I would like a rest. And I'm saying, no, there is no rest, unfortunately. So, but so the ethics are in a way that if you see that there's no end to experience, then future generations of beings that come into being, you want life to be maximally flourishing. You want to reduce suffering for all sentient beings, because sentience seems to be the default condition for consciousness. There's no way out of it. So if that's true, then and this is something that I've been taught recently by some other people who I've had contact recently. They pointed this out to me that, yeah, one implication is sort of the idea that if there's no respite from consciousness, then it's incumbent upon all of us to make conscious sentient beings suffer as little as possible. That which is completely consistent with Buddhism. That's what Buddhism is all about, is reducing conscious suffering. So that's maybe one ethical implication of this. A lot of people have the feeling of, oh, climate change is coming. I'm not going to be around.
Right.
I don't have to worry about it.
Yes.
But in a way, all the sentient beings that come are going to be dealing with it, and you, in a sense, you'll sort of they will have selves. Getting to your point, Nathan, they will have selves just like you, and they will be suffering just as much as you, a particular Nathan, would have suffered. So that's this kind of continuity, this kind of sort of the inextinguishableness, the as Sam Harris put it, the eternality of experience was a good word. I think makes it, sort of puts it on us to reduce suffering, perhaps.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to ask about whether this idea of generic subjective continuity is comforting in the face of death, and also kind of related to that is whether it, I think we probably all fear death to some extent. I know I do, but I wonder if it's actually rational to fear death. So those are maybe two related questions.
yeah. Well, in terms of what one should fear, a lot of people fear oblivion, but
Mhm.
again, as I said before, a lot of people look forward to it.
Right.
But
Yes.
but neither the fear or the attraction to it are valid, because it's not a possibility for you. So
Right. Because this is, you're rejecting. So one of the ways we've heard it described is like life is just like this sliver of light in darkness, where it's like you don't know what came before you were born. You have this very brief window where you live your entire life, and then it ends. You forget everything, and it's gone. But you're saying that that's not the case at all. That sense of existing persists continuously.
right, across all sentient beings, because they will, whoever you are, wherever you are, you've always found yourself present, no matter what the context of your subjectivity is. That's sort of, I mean, this is kind of what grandiose way of putting it, but it's a conclusion that and it sounds mystical, but it really isn't. Again, you just, if you see how a transformation between yourself and someone who's not quite you doesn't involve any episodes of nothingness, then to take the next step and see how death and birth are the same as that. It should to me seal the deal about the fact that you shouldn't anticipate not being here in some form or another. And those forms can, that's the amazing thing. These forms will vary all over the map, all over time and space. It's just to me. I mean, here we are on planet Earth in one small planet in a huge galaxy among billions of other galaxies. We are just one tiny, minuscule manifestation of consciousness, which undoubtedly exists in all these other forms. So it's rather an astonishing perspective when you think that each form is going to experience itself as always being present and is always there for itself. So there's no end to the variety and persistence of experience on this view. But Nathan, I think you had another question besides what we should fear.
Just about whether it's comforting to think about this.
Yeah. So I don't think it's necessarily comforting at all. I think I think it's kind of well, it's astonishing and weird. And so imagine you're on your deathbed and your consciousness is fading, and it's fading to what? Where what will be next? You don't know. But what you do know, what I'm personally convinced of, is there's not going to be nothing. Right. That's not a possibility. But keep in mind, many people think that there's going to be nothing. Isaac Asimov, a very smart guy, who wrote Clockwork Orange, Burgess, Anthony Burgess,
Yeah, right, Burgess, yeah.
had the same intuition. And Paul Edwards wrote a paper on death in which he quotes many important thinkers having the same intuition, that they expect nothing. Sorry, guys.
Yes. Yeah.
Nothing is not an option.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because like if it was an option, it wouldn't be nothing then.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
So
Good.
yeah.
Yes, that's a nice way to
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah.
Right. So in that case, Tom, what should we do at a wake or a funeral? To you, does this change your sort of conception of rituals or rites, or how we should mourn or how we should celebrate? Is there an ideal form that you think it should take?
I don't think it changes that much to me, because each person is their own special, wonderful contribution to each of our lives, so that we can celebrate them and mourn them, both as these unique constellations of characteristics that arrived and then left. But of course, we don't suppose that they've gone somewhere. They've disappeared, and that's kind of weird. I mean, in thinking of people in my life who are no longer, my father, my sister, who have died. They were here and they're no longer here, but it's the fact that they existed is a fantastic, wonderful thing. I appreciate it. I think it's part of our natural endowment to value very deeply those who we share our lives with, and we celebrate that in our memorial services. But ideally, we should let them know before they die just how cool they are.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they should
Exactly.
let us know too. So,
Mhm.
as in my father's celebration after he died, I'm sure that you've heard this before. It's just sad that he couldn't have been there,
Yeah.
just to see the people celebrate him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So have a pre-death ceremony.
Right.
I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
that might be one takeaway.
Should we move on to?
And
Oh, go ahead, Todd. I was just.
yeah, no, I think I was going to say that's something we can discuss in kata, or Can a True Atheist, in the lightning round. Tom, are you prepared for the lightning
Oh,
round?
I don't know. I didn't know I needed to be.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, look, there's no worries. It's just yes or no questions, but you're encouraged to give a longer answer, explain your position. There are no wrong answers, but there are probably no right answers either. I think we've been thinking about this the wrong way. We say there's an infinite number of right answers, but a greater infinite number of wrong answers.
Dueling infinities. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll start it off with an easy one, Tom, right? So we'll think about it as, can a true naturalist, can a true worldview naturalist believe in God?
No.
No. All right. There's not just one big mega consciousness out there overseeing everything?
No. You guys want short answers? I'll say no.
No, that's
You
no, that's
want
good.
the basis
No,
for my
you can-
answers?
You can expand a little bit, but maybe in that case it
Yeah,
isn't
yeah.
necessary.
Well,
Okay.
anytime I answer no, it's because often if it's an empirical claim, behind it is the fact that there's no evidence that I'm aware of to support
Yes,
that claim.
right. Okay. All right. Can a true naturalist think we are just a brain in a vat being experimented on by a mad scientist?
Yes, possibly.
Okay.
Wow. But is there? So that's a case where there's no evidence that we are, right?
Well, David Chalmers has written this wonderful book. I don't know if you've heard about it, called Reality Plus. Okay,
No,
read it. Read
please.
Reality Plus. It's all
Okay.
about that.
That's what it
It's all
is
about
there.
that we could be in a simulation, we could be brains in vats, and what's the evidence that we are or are not. And
Hmm.
those thought experiments are great old chestnuts, and some people think they've disposed of them so that it's not conceivable that you're a brain in a vat. I'm not sure I have a strong opinion, but my less than considered opinion is that yes, it's conceivable that we're brains in vats.
Really? Whereas, like the existence of the Judeo-Christian God is not plausible.
Yeah, because I don't see any evidence, intersubjective, good empirical evidence to support that existence claim. But there may not be, good evidence that we are brains and vats. But I don't. It's sort of a point about the fact that sort of the Descartes' evil demon argument that it's just barely conceivable that all of this is being cooked up by an evil demon, and we are brains and vats being fed, as in the Matrix, being fed stimulation to make us think very realistically that we're in reality when in fact we're brains and vats. By the way, consciousness itself is a virtual reality, so that's something to think about. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that Chalmers necessarily understands. I think he understands it, but Thomas Metzinger and other people. Thomas Metzinger, a philosopher, he's written a book called The Ego Tunnel, and he definitely makes the case that we are consciousness is a virtual reality. Have you either of you had lucid dreams?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. Where you control the dream
not when you could. Well, you
and
not
you
only
kind of
control it, but you know for sure that you're dreaming, and you know for sure you're lying in bed.
yeah
And what does that mean? It means that
yeah
your consciousness is a brain construction. Your vivid experience at that time is what your brain is doing, and the same thing is true right now.
mm,
So you are,
mm,
and then Seth makes the same point in his
right
book, Being You. He says consciousness is a controlled hallucination, essentially
mm,
controlled by the fact that you're getting input from the
right
world and it's modifying your brain such
yeah
that
right
what you're experiencing matches well enough with the world so that you don't get into trouble. It's the same point as Metzinger. Metzinger put it
right
that we're vigorously dreaming at the world. A great
right.
way to put it. So anyway, consciousness is a virtual reality because the world, it's a model that we inhabit and so we're at one remove from the actual world, the physical world.
One of the things that really jumps out at me is just how much more interesting this worldview is than the belief in God. Right? Do you believe in God? No. Can we be a brain in a vat? And then everything is interesting. Like
Yeah, I totally.
it's fun talking about
Yeah,
that.
no, I agree. I know the deistic worldview is so boring. It's so utterly uninspiring. I mean, I'm sorry. I know this is offensive to the religious viewers out there, but it is just so limited. It's so
Yeah,
small.
we've got so many religious
It's just it's
viewers.
just so. I mean, what you want, of course, everyone wants security. You want to be loved, and you want the infinite peace or happiness of being. But it gets boring, folks.
But that's okay because we can move it to the next one.
Yeah,
Can a true naturalist attend a church?
yeah. Unitarian Church. I've gone where they put deed before creed. They're all over the map in terms of their worldviews, and so I've given talks at Unitarian churches. So they're fine. They're basically secularists looking for meaning, and yeah, that's fine. So they call themselves fellowships or congregations, but also churches. So that's fine.
Can a true naturalist question the idea of objective truth?
Yeah, I did for a long time. The idea of the relativity of knowledge, of being enmeshed in one's own perceptual world. I mean, skepticism about knowledge and ethics is something that a true naturalist probably has to grapple with. No, I'm not sure what a true naturalist is actually, but but anyway, yes. So somewhat of a naturalistic persuasion does have to confront the questions of both moral and cognitive skepticism, the skeptical problems of how we know what we know of the basis for morality. Yeah, no, it's a worry. It makes life sometimes all too interesting.
Okay, can a true naturalist be afraid of death?
Totally. I'm I'm afraid of it. I think that's part of our biological endowment is to strongly resist and fear the onset of what we perceive to be the end of ourselves, and is the end of ourselves. But
Yeah.
that's just who we are. But we deal with
But
it.
does it change
Go ahead.
when we think about it this way? Like, does it change how we should prepare for death?
I think we can prepare for death cognitively by imbibing and understanding all of the arguments that we've talked about in the main part of the show about what we should anticipate at death. That may or may not relieve the anxiety and fear to some extent, but I think it. I think it might. I think it might.
Hmm. Okay. Can a true naturalist enjoy reading ghost stories?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, because you can put aside. You don't have to be a sort of hard-nosed realist. You can put aside your worldview for a while and inhabit other scenarios in which, say, ghosts and spirits actually exist. I mean, like the Harry Potter stuff. It's fine.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I
Okay.
to be strict like that would be to be really boring.
That's
Mm.
true. Yes.
Okay, can a true naturalist eat meat?
Ah, boy, that's a tough question. Yes, I think, well, many do, of course, can. Obviously, we're able to. Should they? Is another question. It's
Mm.
a vexed moral question, something that I've struggled with. I eat meat and I'm not proud of it. I'm eat less. I've been a vegetarian for some time, but I think the moral calculus is probably against eating meat, and I find it a moral failing in
Mm.
myself that I've not been able to sort of align myself with that calculus. So it's a failing on my part. Is to be
Wow.
absolutely honest, but I will probably continue to do it because
Yeah.
I'm.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I think it's impossible, I suppose, to live like 100% morally perfect lives. I think.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, some
Um,
people do a lot better jobs than others.
right. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
That's a great point.
all right. Okay. And so for the last one, can a true naturalist believe our lives have a special meaning?
Well, the meanings that we find in life are come out of it, are our own doing. Where there are lots of potentials, lots of opportunities for finding meaning. Special meaning, I'm not sure. I guess we'd have to get into what we mean by special, but everyone, the issue of meaning is simply a matter of, I mean, you find yourself engaged in activities, and the problem of meaning disappears. The problem of meaning really is finding yourself without something to do. Or you can think of the grander scheme of the ultimate meaning of things, in which case I do have an answer for that. There is no ultimate meaning, there's no purpose attached to existence. And I think it's a fairly easy point to grasp. If you think of the totality of things, it's you can't assign a purpose to the grand totality of existence. It's only when your ascension being with purposes, with an agenda, that the question of meaning arises, I would say. So we find meaning all the time, but there's no ultimate or special meaning or purpose that I've been able to locate. And I think it's kind of a logical point. I've explored that in the spirituality page of the naturalism website. And I know spirituality is not a word that atheists like to hear, but I do use it because it's a word that refers to existential concerns. I don't think there's any other word out there that really does as good a job as referring to those concerns.
How can people, if people want to find out more about this, where would you send them? What should they read first on naturalism.org? Or is it naturalism.com?
.org.
The link will be below.
Yeah, good. Um, I've written. I think that one place to look. There's a section called Worldview Naturalism, and it has links to sort of some overviews of what naturalism is about. But my favorite thing is a book chapter I wrote for a book called Beyond Religion, and it's called Naturalism and Well-Being. It's at the website. There's a huge amount of material there, but Naturalism and Well-Being, a book chapter, and I think that kind of lays out the benefits, the attractions of naturalism as a worldview. It doesn't attempt to justify it as a worldview, but it basically says what's in it for you and for all of us if we all became naturalists, in my sense.
Awesome. Well, great place to start. Everybody should check that out. Tom Clark, thanks for joining us today.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. More power to you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And I will look forward to future episodes, and perhaps we shall chat again one of these days.
Okay, that was Tom Clark of naturalism.org. So, Todd, what did you think about that conversation?
I mean, it's nice that we're able to, we have the luxury of contemplation, right? As atheists, once you clear out the deck, like anything's possible. And this is something that I think Tom mentioned it, right? Like we think about things epistemologically, right? What is our system of knowledge? Once you shelve religion, right? Once you push all of that aside and move on to something completely different, this is a huge break in the way we think about things, the conclusions we come to. And it's totally unmoored. It's totally, or at least unconnected to those previous systems of thought. And that's part of what it means when you move beyond atheism, right? Like it's not tied to these previous moral systems that have come up with the way the world is ordered. It comes to radically different conclusions. And that's awesome. Like that's fun. There's a real variety of thought here. How do you feel about it, Nathan? Were you taken in? What spoke to you? What brought you into this world?
Uh, I think it's an interesting idea about not your consciousness continuing after death, but some consciousness continuing, and it really almost couldn't be otherwise. And I think, yeah, just we were just talking before we started recording about.
Oh God, we were talking. It was
I now that I sort of thought about it more, I like this idea of like, okay, there's a person in the 1800s who's thinking, what happens to me after I die? Where is my consciousness going to go? And in a way, you could almost say that person's consciousness, or some kind of consciousness, is now mine. I just don't have any memories of that person's experiences, and then like in the future after I'm gone, someone in 2020 or 2222 will think like, oh, I could just his consciousness could now be mine. And I mean,
right.
it's to talk about like my consciousness or your consciousness. In a way, I guess it's like it's. I don't know if it even makes sense to personalize it in that way. I don't know. I mean, obviously, you have this experience of the self, which is sort of also like a kind of construct of our mind. But it is like consciousness itself. I think everyone is experiencing it.
Right. Yeah.
It's almost hard to talk about it, and I think that's where philosophers are so talented at, you know, finding the words to kind of make sense of these like almost these concepts that we really struggle to understand, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and as we talked about before, like that notion of like this persistent consciousness, there is like you can make a factual statement that says we are the universe becoming conscious of itself, right? There is a consciousness in the universe that's made of the universe, and that's not refutable. We're products of the universe. Humans have created a stock of collective knowledge that explains and explores and defines and measures and actually knows things about the universe. And that is weird. That like there's something categorically weird about that. But like just having this one conversation with Tom and we start making these big connections and we start thinking about these things, and these are things that we would never think about if we were just in church all day. If we spent an hour and a half in church, we wouldn't be on this track. And one of the things I noticed that this track does is it lets us think about, it lets us become very, very future oriented, right? Like it's not about what humans were doing 6,000 years ago. It's not about trying to make ancient texts relevant to today. It's about what is the stuff that people do now with computers. What does it mean? How do we understand when they start thinking? If it makes a conversation, if we have a conversation with a computer, how should we interpret this interaction? And that's really, really important, right? To be able to think about things that haven't happened yet and try to make sense of them. Even if your predictions are totally wrong, it's just a wonderful exercise.
I mean, I think, well, I mean, I definitely agree that this opens up new avenues for us to think about, and to not be worried about like how is this going to fit into such and such doctrine or whatever. Like,
Mm.
can we square a belief in like consciousness being something that is not just human or biological or something? Like, can we square that with creation or something like that? I mean,
Yeah.
doesn't even come into it.
Right.
uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
It's a much better point.
yeah.
It's yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think it's, yeah, I mean, also like there's so many angles to go down in terms of whether it's more of a philosophical angle or in terms of like what an atheist worldview can lead to, is or is it more political or whatever.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, it's
Yeah,
really
I mean,
good.
I'm really curious. I think we asked about, how it would inform rituals and stuff, and doesn't really seem to.
Yeah, it I think you
Right.
did make a good point about like funerals and doing doing it, saying all the good stuff while the person's alive is better than
Yeah.
when they're dead,
Right.
because and that's another thing. If you think there's an afterlife, then I guess the person, you think they're going to be hearing it from from above or below.
Yeah.
But but in this case, yeah. But it's also it's kind of morbid too, maybe, to be like, like you're getting close. We better have this like living funeral for you. It's not.
Gonna have to do it all over again.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I
And
just gotta
then if
start
the
over.
person lives another 5 years or something or whatever,
Yeah.
then what?
All right.
So yeah, but I do think it's like it should change how we grieve death. I mean, it's not like it makes death less bad necessarily, but maybe it'll
Yeah.
change how we think about it.
A big change. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really strange. I mean, one thing that it did kind of poke me, like, but how things like fugue states or like getting blackout drunk, how you don't have that memory, right? But it's just in Korean, you cut the tape, right? Where it's just this hard edit where you go from you're out drinking with your friends, so you wake up in your bed and you feel awful. You're like, what the hell? And you're going through your pockets to figure out what the hell you got up to. And like the astounding thing is, like, if you've seen people in that state, they are still themselves. They act exactly like themselves, but they're drunk, right? Like they're just amped up. When you're in a state like blackout drunk, you're you, but you don't have that continuity of memory and you don't have that continuity of consciousness. And that's very strange, right? And this kind of describes an aspect of that I've never been able to put my finger on. And it is kind of astounding. It did kind of tilt my worldview maybe a little bit. Like, ooh, that's an interesting observation. What does that mean? Like that connection between memory and consciousness. Why is it that my consciousness persists when my memory doesn't? I used to know this guy who he had suffered amnesia, and he just lost years of his life. And I was like, geez, like what the hell happened to you for that to cause that? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know because I had amnesia, right? But and it was years where he was himself. And then there's that gap, right? But it doesn't exist as a blank. Doesn't when he rewinds it, it's not a blank. It's it's seamless,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And I think retroactively, some of it came back and started to fill in, but that's weird. That's super, super weird. And you can develop skills in that time. You can change your shape of your body. You can change your stock of knowledge. And then yeah, but you persist. That's really weird. But I mean, this line of thinking, that sort of thought experiment. Ooh, it's like, ooh, there's some meat on that bone. That's a really interesting
Yeah.
road to go down.
Yeah. I think there's another sort of point from that too about like the connection between like memory and this like the self, that
Mm,
if you were like another thought experiment, like your memories are just uploaded into someone else,
mm,
in what way really are you different, because the person would be experiencing it as their own life basically, I guess, or whatever. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's just
yeah.
so much
Oh yeah, I mean, there's tons of
to
like brain swap or like, but I mean, this is the thing. Like, it's interesting. We get to think about this stuff, and we're free from the shackles of religion. That enough, like the luxury of contemplation, is just fantastic, and to be able to travel down these roads as far as you want to go
yeah.
is great.
Yeah, that's another,
So
yeah, another point here. Just like, yeah, there's no place where it's like I'm worried about going down this road because it might lead to something bad.
I'll be
Uh,
tempted. I'll go to
there's,
hell.
yeah,
I
is
know
that
it.
there's no point like that. Yeah,
No, no, there's nothing. Yeah, it's awesome. And if you're really into it, I mean, check the links below. Tom sent us links to a few articles, the link to the website if you want to get more involved. If you have more questions, you could probably reach out to Tom. I imagine he'd love to hear from you. Let's see, anything else we need to, any other housekeeping we need to do?
we'd just like to thank the Patreon supporters and
Yes,
and our audience in general for listening. Really
absolutely.
appreciate your support.
Yep, totally. If you have thoughts on this, be sure to reach out. Nate G. Alexander on Twitter. If Twitter's still
Yeah,
around when this, if it's
yeah.
still working, we'll
I've
need to check on that.
Yeah, I've got a
By the
Mastodon account now. I need to add that in. I'm maybe like leaving Twitter. I don't know. It's hard to leave, but I'll post my Mastodon link as well.
oh my
Yeah,
goodness, it's already been discussed. It's happening.
yeah,
Of course, and we'd love to have more of you as patrons. If you can't give, we know how tight things get. Hey, like and subscribe. That's one big way to help. Be sure to check out our partner site, AU Studios. Throw them a few ducats if you can. Um, it's Atheist United. They're out in LA. They're doing it, getting it together, organizing people. Um, let's see. Big thanks, Red Japan. And big thanks to Tom. That was an amazing discussion. Loved it. Be sure to check out his site. Um, and of course, any of the authors that he mentioned, any of those books. And oh man, the guy's just a font of
yeah,
wisdom, isn't he?
yes, yeah,
Oh my goodness. But otherwise, yeah, just we'll be back. Smash that like button. Come on back, and we'll see you then. Bye bye.